Welcome to the Why Didn't I Know podcast, episode 29. I'm your host, Dr. Jenny Martin, and in this episode, we're talking about whether sex is a purifying force. Now, this question came in from a listener to this podcast. She explained to me that she had learned on Instagram, not from me because I'm not on Instagram, but she had learned from reading something on Instagram that sex could get rid of anger, could get rid of different, quote, negative emotions because sex was a purifying force. And she wasn't sure about that, so she knew that I teach the science and she wanted to look at it from that perspective. And if you look at sexual energy as the key element that makes up your biofield, your energy field. Another word for this is torsion. This has to do with the whole field of torsion physics. In Chinese medicine, this is called qi. It's also called prana. There's many words. In fact, all throughout ancient history, there was always a word for the sexual energy. And it runs through our body. It surrounds our body. It's our life force energy. Is it a purifying force, however, is the big question. Well, before I answer that directly, let's just talk about how sexual energy has been used throughout time. And let me give you an example that's very profound. In the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, one Holocaust survivor has written that SS commanders, camp commanders in those concentration camps would habitually masturbate as they were whipping the inmates in these camps. And this was actually dictated by Hitler, who was into sadism himself, to motivate the camp commanders to actually inflict that kind of torture on the inmates by eroticizing the torture. It was a means by which Hitler could ensure they were motivated to continue to do that. And this Holocaust survivor has written accounts of watching the men having their hand down their trousers as they're inflicting this torture on the people. And so they were definitely using sexual energy to create a certain outcome, whether it was purifying or not. I think it's really clear there. Sex in and of itself, sexual energy in and of itself is neutral. It's a force, but it's not purifying in and of itself. And again, the word purifying is such a tricky word because of the fact that purifying takes on these levels of morality, this puritanical religious connotation. But what this podcast listener is talking about is whether sexual energy can somehow alleviate things like rage or anger, somehow get rid of those emotions. And first of all, the answer is no. If we're talking about this in terms of the life force energy that is the biofield, that is all around you. You can eroticize emotions, which is what happened in Nazi Germany. And interestingly enough, the number one capital in the world for BDSM is Berlin, Germany. So just to note that sexual energy isn't in and of itself purifying. It does not transmute emotions. What it does is you can eroticize rage. You can eroticize different emotions. You can eroticize fear, but what that does is it doesn't eliminate the fear. It doesn't eliminate the anger from your field. What it does is it puts a sexual charge on it, which I would say is not helpful. If you understand how the brain and body works in terms of conditioning behavior, think back to Pavlov's dog, that experiment where they rang a bell. The dog learned to pair that sound of the bell with getting food, and the dog would salivate that it was going to get the food. And then after conditioning that response, hear the bell, salivate, get food, they took away the food and rang the bell, and the dog would still salivate. So that was a conditioned response. And it's the same thing that happens if you pair two things together, just like pairing your Bluetooth headphone to your computer, and your computer recognizes it and then works with it. If you pair anger with turn on with self-pleasure with sex, you're going to pair those two responses in your neurology. Neurons that wire together fire together, which means that you're more likely, once you repeat that type of pairing, you're more likely in the future to require being angry to want to have sex. And that does happen with couples where there's kind of lukewarm about having sex, and then someone picks a fight and all of a sudden they feel like they want to do it. But is that really healthy for the relationship? And more importantly, is it healthy for this biofield? What we know is that your body is made of energy. Energy is vibration. And if there is a lower vibration, that is affecting the cell. So anger is linked to all sorts of disease, including cancer. A healthy person is not going to linger in states of anger and invite anger as a way of life. Anger is a necessary part of living. I mean, it's not a necessary part of living, but it's not something to avoid. So anger is a way of telling you that your boundaries have been violated, most especially if anger happens in the moment, if it's situational. Now, there can be long-standing anger that has to do with a result of, for instance, sexual trauma. You are finally coming to terms with the fact that you've had sexual trauma in your childhood and you have rage, and that's real. And that needs to be dealt with and processed and addressed. Just like situational anger needs to be addressed. But it's not healthy to take that anger and without looking at it, without learning from it, without letting it be your teacher, so your boundaries aren't violated in the future, to go and transmute it through sex is ignoring the wisdom that anger is there to bring you. If we learn from anger, we can learn not to let our boundaries be violated in the future. We can learn to set boundaries. We can learn to ask for what we need. We can learn to be really clear in our communication. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get angry in the future and things aren't going to happen and people aren't going to respect you. Life happens, but we can let these different emotions that we call negative teach us. We can learn from them. And the idea being to get curious. Oh, I am not an angry person. I am not angry, but I'm experiencing this emotion of anger right now. And have a sense of witnessing that emotion instead of being wrapped into it. And have a sense of curiosity. Was I angry 10 minutes ago? Was I angry a day ago? When did this emotion start? And what precipitated that? Was it a TV show I was watching? Was it a conversation with someone I had? Was it thoughts that I had about a past experience? What was the actual inciting event or conversation in your mind, or what precipitated the feelings of anger. So you have to be like a Sherlock Holmes, be your own investigator, not to incriminate yourself and not to go on a tyrant of blaming other people, but to have compassion and curiosity for yourself about the genesis of this emotion. Because only when we truly understand what is causing us to feel this way can we really deal with it. And what this listener was asking me about was, well, should I just take the emotion and sexualize it? And I would say that's not a good idea for many reasons. Number one, as I mentioned, you're setting yourself up to have the experience where you need that anger to get turned on in the future. Neurons that wire together fire together. And that's a very limiting place to be, to need to have anger in your life, to have arousal. That is going to stir up a lot of drama in your life, completely unnecessary. And it's not even conscious. You unconsciously start allowing, yourself to pick a fight with your partner, or you're just finding reasons to be angry in the world because that's your access to your sexual connection. And that does not need to be. That's not how you were originally designed. When you came from the factory on the other side, in the other realm, with your factory settings, so to speak, anger and sex, anger and eroticism were not paired. Can they get paired in childhood, for instance? Sure they can. But it's completely not true to say that even if those two emotions got paired in childhood, eroticism and rage, for instance, does not mean that that is your future, that you need to live that way forever. Now, granted, you can go online, read articles, even in Psychology Today, that will say that if you have that connection that was made early on in your life, for instance, with eroticism and rage, that's pretty much the way that your sexual template is going to be for the rest of your life. And I'm here to tell you, after having worked with countless people on issues like this, that it is absolutely incorrect to say that if something was fused early on in your life, if the neurons wire together and fire together early on in life, that is setting yourself up for that for the rest of your life. That is wrong. That is not true. Now, if you just don't take any action and work on this, yes, it will just happen by default. But if you are interested in having freedom from that, if you're interested in exploring eroticism through pleasure without pain, eroticism with pleasure and joy, with sensual, soft touch rather than aggressive touch, that is absolutely possible for any person. Our brain is neuroplastic. Our brain is pliable. It can change. It can reroute, just like your GPS will reroute if you're take the wrong street and you're having your phone guide you to a certain destination and you go on the wrong turn that your phone didn't want you to go on. It will recalculate the route. Well, this is the whole thing about neuroplasticity and the brain. It's not going to happen on its own. You actually need to work with someone, work through a process to guide your body and your mind to have a different pattern of arousal to different emotions. It's not going to happen on its own. But can you reroute your brain to have a new association away from having to be angry to get turned on, away from having to have aggressive type of sex, and into more of a sensual, erotic, passionate love that turns you on automatically without having to do anything, without having to try to intellectualize that or override it. It can be your natural native response. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity, and that is available to every one of us. So to get back to the question that someone wrote in with, we don't want to start off voluntarily pairing negative emotions to our arousal. It's not a productive way to deal with emotions. What's more productive is to take out a journal, get curious about what this emotion is telling you, when it started, what you need to learn from it, and then discharge it from your body when you felt like you've really learned from it. Release it through your body, and not release it through an erotic movement, but through exercise. Actually sweat, go on a run, lift weights, pour that feeling of rage, pour that feeling of grief, whatever you're holding in your body, pour it into the workout. And I'm not saying that that will happen the first time you go exercise, but as you allow your body to witness the feeling, witness the emotion, and learn from it, and then release it through your body, it needs to be vigorous movement where you sweat. So it can be vigorous dancing. It doesn't have to be weightlifting, but it does need to be some vigorous movement to move that emotion out of your body and not to eroticize it. So the whole topic of sexual energy and whether it's good or bad or purifying or not, sexual energy, when we're looking at this scientifically, this is not a moralistic decision. Sex is a vital force, as a powerful, powerful force. But it's what intention you pair with it, and it's what emotion you pair with it. As I mentioned, the SS commanders in the concentration camps, they were pairing a sadistic intention with either disgust or anger, and then they had the eroticism going on at the same time. So there's that type of sex, and then there's the sex where it's paired with an intention to know the divine in yourself, to know the divine in your partner, and the intention being to have the sexual experience be a sacred fusion with the highest within you and with the highest vibration on the planet. The original sexual alchemy that was taught in ancient Egypt, that Mary Magdalene carried over, her being Mary the prophetess, Mary the Jewess. Her writings are found today in a Greek alchemist who learned from her. He quoted her in his writings that still exist to today. What we find is that sexual energy is the force that powers alchemy, that creates the philosopher's stone. It is a powerful, powerful force. Now, can it be used in dark ways? Yes, it can. This is the path of Aleister Crowley. This is the path of Jack Parsons. This is the path of other people who have taken this energy and used it in dark occult ways. And that ends up destroying the people they're having sex with. I mean, his wives ended up either committing suicide or one was in a mental institution. So you can destroy people, crush their souls through using this powerful life force energy with very sadistic intentions. Or you can use this powerful life force energy like Cleopatra did, like Mary Magdalene, how she did with Yeshua. And it becomes a union with the divine. It becomes bringing the highest sense of devotion, love, pleasure, passion. And this is not taking passion out of the equation. Another word for passion is lust. Lust is not wrong. Lust only becomes problematic when it's narcissistic, self-serving, and ego-driven. When lust, which the original etymology of that word in the old Germanic language was religious joy. So lust in and of itself is not problematic. It's the intention that you bring to it, and it's whether your heart is open or not. If your heart is open, you're having a love connection with the other person, which includes empathy for the other person. You wouldn't impose your will over the other person. Empathy means that in this context, that you wouldn't do anything to that other person that you wouldn't want done to you. So there's a complete sharing and connection in that way. Life force energy, sexual energy is very powerful. And as I just mentioned, you can channel it into an incredibly transformative force, which is the basis of early alchemy, which is the basis of what Yeshua and Magdalene had created and is contained in the Gospel of Philip. That the highest prayer, the holiest of the holies, is this type of sexual union. There's nothing more powerful than experiencing sexual energy in this way. And there's no room for anger in that. There's no room for sadness in that. There's no room, not that anger and sadness are bad. No, they're an important part of our human experience, but they have no place in this type of sex. When we're talking about purifying ourselves for sex, it's not getting rid of lust. It's not getting rid of desire. It's dealing with our lower vibration emotions on our own. So working through a process, like I just mentioned, moving it through your body, journaling it about it, learning from it, working through your own lower vibration emotions, your survival emotions, and not bringing those to the sexual situation. So sex being the highest form of prayer, the highest form of alchemy, but we don't look to our partner to save us. We don't look to the sexual union to change us. There's a certain level of the initiate in these mystery schools when they were teaching this, the initiate being prepared as an individual first. Our individual work is so important. We can't just depend on the sex with another person to do all our spiritual work for us. Our own individual spiritual work first is so necessary, so that when we do look for this union and participate in this union with this other person, we're bringing them our best. We're not trying to get them to somehow save us from ourselves. We're bringing them our best. They're bringing their best to us. And that like vibration between the two people creates an enormous shift at the level of quantum reality. It creates a phase shift in the biofield of both individuals that's far, far more powerful than solo meditation. The way of sexual alchemy is the most powerful transformative force that can open your pineal gland, that can access a psychedelic state naturally. It's very, very powerful, but it has been a hidden path precisely because of what we see today with the dark use of sexual energy. With such a powerful force, it's very easy for personal gain, for manipulation, for control to come in to this whole area, and for people to corrupt the energy. And that's what we see a lot today. Anyway, that's all I have to say for this episode on the topic of purification and sexual energy. There's a lot more to say, and I'll be uploading these episodes more frequently. If this episode was helpful to you, please do share it with a friend so they can benefit as well. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.